We are live and recording. Okay, so welcome to the SaaS Alerts call, and this is on the complete guide to securing a compromised account number 365. Air quote complete. Did my best to do this for you, and again, bring in an expert like James Carroll. Again, so the goal here is, number one, is always to facilitate, right? This is about a conversation. This isn't just like we normally do with all SASE calls. It's not one way directional, but it's also meant to, be facilitated to bring James in and share his knowledge as we go through this. So just curious, just quick raise of hands, you can do it. Has anybody dealt this past year, 2022, with account compromise? I'm just curious in any of your clients.
We've done everything we can to stop it. So other than not having to respond to one.
So you haven't had one yet, Andrew?
That's right.
That's awesome. So
Ben says yes. He's doing it right now.
I think James is doing it right now based on what he already said.
Oh yeah.
Well, I appreciate everybody's candor on it. So I'm going to start off. Have I shared this screen with you guys before?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think I did a while back, Andy. And the reason I wanted to share this again, because I'm hoping this becomes a living, breathing document you guys take, you create content, you use it for lunch and learns, you use it for prospecting, you use it for existing customers. If it's one thing we know for sure, if we aren't speaking in the language of our, prospect or customer, it's really hard for them to do something, right? Because, number one, we know communication is about 55% body language, 35% about tonality, and then only 7% about the words. But if we're going to actually get some movement in what we're trying to do, which is ultimately secure our customers and gain customers through education and thought leadership, we got to put it in some way they can relate to. And so if we think about, how account compromise typically, again, I'm going to use, please give me some leeway today in terms of typical, right? It's going to be credentials, right, are taken. And the analogy being, hey, you have a home, you have a business, Mr. Customer or Mr. Prospect or Mrs. Prospect. What if you, let it so easy that people could, just get keys to your place or the codes to your business? What would things look like? And then better yet, let's say they got into your business, you weren't aware of it, and then they start operating out of your business or your home. So not to beat the analogy to death, but you get the kind of where we could start to make people feel like, okay, I get the analogy. Is that fair?
Yes.
Right. All right. So when we talk about account compromise, right, we know the statistic is high. I don't like to deal with a lot of statistics because everybody uses them, right? It's the FUD numbers. But I just wanted to kind of start with the breadth of data breaches, how they start, right? Or how most exploitation starts, if you look at MITRE ATT&CK. So if you think about compromise remediation, right, it's probably going to be the top, and this is where I'll just air to you, James. In IR, what percentage are going to be, compromised credentials that, like, as far as requests and tickets and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, when we do any kind of breach response, business email compromise due to compromised credentials is probably, it's probably 50-50 with phishing. And, when we talk about, like, even just in general, like, what's the biggest threat vector to an organization? Social engineering is still up there, but credential reuse, through credential compromise is huge. And, like, in my opinion, like, the main reason for that is because these credentials in the past year or two have become so easily available. Like, there's places, even on the plain web, like, you don't even need to go to the dark web anymore. There's a company called IntelX. We subscribe to it. It's $3,000 a year. It's a Polish company. You can go on there, register, and then you can just look up domains, and they have their own internal database of every leak that's ever occurred. Every password hash has ever been leaked, and they keep updating it. And, you can pay them in Bitcoin if you want. We do ACH because we're not, we don't really have anything to hide. But, we use it, and attackers use it too. And, it's wildly easy to find these like old breach credentials that are part of like the LinkedIn breaches and the Twitter breaches of the world. So yeah, it's always increasing.
Right. So if we put those two together, James, BEC, phishing, and then the other way in which compromise, M365 is misconfiguration. What we add all that up, what kind of percentages are we looking at?
I'm trying to think the last time I had a call from a customer or from a potential customer that wasn't BEC or phishing. It's at least 90%.
Right.
Yeah.
So just like think about that for just a moment. When we think about like we layer in more control and more controls and more controls and more security controls, and I'm not suggesting that we're not at least at a bare minimum like a CIS implementation group 1. So again, like don't think I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. I think that's absolutely crucial to have those security controls. We're not going to get cyber insurance and a whole host of other things. If you're in regulated industries, you're never going to pass an audit. But if we're really going to make an indent in terms of our own MSP and our customers, this is probably where it's at between phishing, social engineering, and things that lead to business email compromise. So how does it happen? And again, just quick show of hands, have you guys dealt with any of these things in the past year or so where, you're seeing, your customers say, hey, we're getting weird invoices, the CEO's asking so-and-so, to do something, but the CEO isn't doing that. Anybody dealing with any of these or has dealt with any of these?
It came to me as it was basically an email to me that said, hey, look, we want, we want you to approve this transfer. And obviously I recognize this, but it's not something the average person might take advantage of or listen.
Right. That's an excellent point, Andy, again, because you're obviously highly sensitized and highly aware, but it's incredible. James, you had a recent story, right, about an interesting one that wasn't like that really was well architected. Can you kind of share what happened? I was fascinated by this.
Yeah, it was like really sophisticated, especially for BEC. So it was this company, they're in Rochester, New York, and they're manufacturing, small family-owned business, and they outsource their payroll to like a PEO type company, which a lot of small businesses do. And what the attacker did is, how they found out is because the payroll company called the owner, was like, hey, for these 6 people that you just hired, I need more information. You need to fill out one of these spreadsheets. Like, what are you talking about? I was like, the 6 people that you hired, you sent me all the information. Like, we didn't hire 6 people. What they did is they compromised their email. They figured out who did payroll, and they basically did the whole BEC email forwarding thing to payroll, but they actually stole the identity of 6 people in Rochester, New York, and said, oh, these are my new employees. Here's all their tax information. And I Googled them. It was legit. Like they sent them like W-9s with their actual socials and their address of people that live in Rochester. So it looks like they're actually employees, but their bank accounts are all offshore bank accounts. It's like, hey, here's our 6 new hires. They're each getting a $10,000 bonus or a $20,000 bonus starting day 1. Every 2 weeks, put this in their account. So like it was the first time I saw like an actual identity theft get combined with BEC.
Yeah, really, really amazing. Any thoughts on that, folks? Thinking about that, like it's incredible. And when you listen to like a SANS briefing, if you guys are familiar with SANS, really interesting when you listen to their best IR people, and they speak about that from a hacking, like threat actor sophistication, credentials and BEC. They're like, this is not, the sophisticated stuff. However, the way in which they do it is fairly complex from a psychological level. They're excellent at it. And to the tune of, in the last 5 years, about, I think that the numbers at around, don't hold me to the exact figure, something around 18 billion now has been taken as a result of this. So incredibly successful, obviously financially motivated. So how do we identify? So this would be the first, piece, right? How do we identify this? So picture, we're think about this as a security awareness training that you're doing for a group of customers, a group of prospects, a lunch and learn, get people, to come see, a value add to your community, right? So how you're saying, hey, how do we identify if something might have been a compromise? Well, number one, your password no longer works would be the indicator number one. Number two, and again, just show of hands if any of these you've dealt with, again, over the past year, right? So critical changes in security, that you would use for, recovery of emails, phone numbers, and things like that. We've already talked about this. Unusual financial requests, right? Andy, you had one.
Right.
Elevated, failed authentications. And I'm going to pause real quick here. When I think authentication, let me just quickly jump to James, when you're doing white hat work and we're talking about MFA, can you kind of give us some insight onto, your success there and what you're doing?
Yeah. So first, MFA, 2-3 years ago, right, we'd come across about 50% of people wouldn't be using MFA. Now it's uncommon if people don't use MFA, but the problem that we're seeing is, if they don't use like a single sign-on, it's like they might have an MFA on some things, but not everything. And, the chance of that person using the same password for more than one thing is pretty high. So if we can get into something that doesn't use MFA, the chance of us doing damage is pretty high. But even with this was huge when Uber got breached, was MFA fatigue attacks. So and I've noticed that my own Okta, which we use, they have some defenses in place to prevent against MFA fatigue. But Duo, I remember when that first happened, we read about it and we're like, we got to start doing that. And it'll be like 10 o'clock at night and we're trying to get into CFO's email account. We got his password and we're just spraying him with prompts. And it's probably, he's probably sitting on his couch drinking a beer and he's getting 100 of these things. So we just put it in a script. So it just keeps doing it and he just keeps bombarded with it. And maybe you wouldn't be, but to me, it was surprising. You'd be shocked at how many people, they just get a million of these things. And at some point it's like, what, screw it. And they hit the green check mark and it goes away and they don't think anything of it. And it makes sense because off hours like that, 10 o'clock at night, they probably can't call help desk, right? They probably can't call anyone in the office. They just want their phone to stop vibrating at that point and they'll do whatever it takes to get that to happen.
It's interesting. Anybody have any of those MFA fatigue type attacks?
No, but these are good points to raise in a lunch and learn for sure.
Yeah. And again, Andy, to your point, is again, things that you would think how could someone fall for it? But you pound somebody enough over and over and over, and they finally like James said, enough. I need this to stop.
Or
right?
the phone's going to die because it's going to drain.
Yeah, exactly. So here are some of the other ones, suspicious notifications. And we talk about this a lot with SaaS alerts, right? Newly created folders and forwarding rules. So then, what do we do? Right? Well, step one, obviously we're going to reset, that password, enable MFA, it says AV. We're probably, all using, or most of us using, some type of EDR. James, anything that, when you're getting in an IR case, what you might add or enunciate here, what to do?
Yeah, in the past couple months, I can tell you we've assisted in a lot of these. And nothing was as nightmarish as when the MSP did not manage the email. There was this one customer and they, for whatever reason, went through like GoDaddy for Office. And if you ever try to get logs from GoDaddy, I don't know what it is. It's like the worst version of O365 you can possibly imagine. Getting logs from that was the most painful experience I've ever had in my life. Like, it was miserable. So, and their MSP was like, yeah, we just haven't, we never really had a need to migrate their mail over. It worked great. And, we're admins. I'm like, you need to migrate this mail over and have control over it, because that was terrible. And then, just touching briefly on the AV point, like, there's a big difference between, traditional AV, like a web route, and an EDR, like a SentinelOne, or, there's a bunch of really great ones out there now. But even when we do testing, like if we go in a network and we do a pen test and they're using like an S1 or a CrowdStrike or a Cylance, it's like, this just got significantly sweatier because they're difficult to bypass with the pull out of stops. If they're using like traditional Defender, right? And I can never keep up with the different Defender names, but not the ATP or the new one, we can get around it. Not centrally managed, we can get around it. But if it's a good centrally managed EDR, it gets a lot harder.
James, is it a lot harder though when you have legitimate credentials as well? And if so, why?
So, great question. No. So the thing about having traditional credentials, like if you get creds on a network, you can start doing things that don't look malicious. Like, for example, RDPing into a machine. RDP on the internal network, usually there's no EDR that I know of that will block that. And then once you get onto that way, you can start, hey, maybe I can disable this. Maybe I can drop files to it. You can do more damage. So, the more access you get, really, the less that EDR plays a role. But, if you have no access or no creds, it's tough. Domain user, I mean, you can start looking at file shares and things like that. It's not uncommon that, that's exactly what we do. Is if someone's using one of those EDRs, my goal is to not touch an endpoint. Like, I want to get admin access on this network without touching an endpoint. And you can typically do that by grabbing creds, cracking passwords, and then, sooner or later you end up with domain admin passwords.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting too, yeah, one second, Andy. What I was just going to say is interesting. If you guys follow it all, Black Cat, the Black Cat ransomware group. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they're the innovator right now. But they are using a lot of MSP tools, James. And so again, the term living off the land, right? If they're in with proper creds, and you're an MSP using those tools, the EDR is going to say, this looks all well and good. Is that fair?
Definitely. Yeah. And we did one, it was actually at college, and they were using, I don't know, I think it was like AMP for endpoints, whatever, they get crazy good pricing on Cisco. So whatever the Cisco product was, but we couldn't get remote access, but they were using ConnectWise Control, Screen Connect. So I'm like, well, this has to be whitelisted. So I just installed Screen Connect on it, and literally on our own AWS cloud managed Screen Connect, and we gained access that way. So yeah, those are whitelisted. The RMM sometimes is the best form of C2. I actually did a presentation at one of the ConnectWise events, and I called it, the title was like ConnectWise Command and Control, because that's exactly what it was.
Fair enough. Andy, how's that apple, by the way? It looks really good.
I'm sorry, I've been eating my lunch. I'm on the West Coast. So
that's okay.
The question that I have is, what is the, would you say is the delta between a non-EDR protected account and an EDR protected account? Because that also steps into the cost benefit analysis of why they would want enhanced, I call it enhanced security. If I take it one step further, application whitelisting as a step beyond EDR.
Yeah. In terms of delta, like it's, like measurable differences, the way I measure things is like, basically, can I extract creds? Can I run malware on it, or can I?
Mm-hmm.
If it's not next gen, not heuristic based, not EDR, and it's like a web route or a Sophos or like a traditional AV, like it's basically, you might as well not even have AV on it. Like it's a non-factor for me. I can use, and like there's these files, they're called ICAR test files. You might have heard of them.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
but they test malware. Like we went into WebRoot and like, we'll just run these ICAR test files, and it got like 2 of them, and they're old, like they're not new by any means. So the stuff we create does like, like unhooking Windows APIs and encrypting shellcode and, all sorts of crazy stuff. And if it's not tested, it's not detecting a basic ICAR test file, it stands no chance against stuff like
So
that. Where
that's a very powerful statement, James. That what you said was the fact that if they're not using the latest generation, like Sentinel-1 or Cylance, and they're not using an EDR with that, or to have this stuff monitored, it only takes you seconds, minutes, hours to get in. What would you say?
Yeah, so I mean, if we're, where the EDR plays the role is when you actually get on the endpoint. When you get on the endpoint, then you want to basically escalate privileges and do a bunch of other malicious things. If they're not running one of those, I don't even think twice about what I'm doing, because I know it's not going to stop anything anything in the last decade, it won't stop. Whereas if they're using something good, then I actually got to spend a good chunk of time developing the payload and the malware to try to bypass. But yeah, and that's, and the main thing is like a lot of the older stuff isn't behavior based, so it's all signature based. So you can literally Google and within 5 minutes figure out how to bypass signature based AV. It's very straightforward.
So someone who thinks they're protected with, hey, I've got my antivirus, I'm all set. The truth is they're really not. If they don't have multi-factor authentication in place and they're compromised for a credential, it's literally minutes, if I'm understanding you correctly, for someone to begin to really work and do lateral moves inside their network.
Yeah, and like the scariest part is when you look at things like macros, like word-based macro documents and maldocs. Mark of the web, which is the thing where if you get a Word document through your mail, it's like, hey, this came from the internet, right? That saves a lot of people's bacons now. But like 2-3 months ago, when there was actually a pretty well-known bypass, and then it didn't even exist before that, I mean, it didn't stand a chance. Like it was running that payload almost every single time. So yeah, it's like I said, if it's not anything next gen, it's like, to me, I'm like, it's basically no AV. And then you see occasionally like people that have good AV, but it's not centrally managed. And what that means is no one's getting alerts. So I can go and run a payload, it gets blocked. Well, I got unlimited tries to bypass it. So it might take me 20-30 tries, but as soon as I bypass it, I'm good to go. And if no one's getting alerts that, hey, something bad's going on here, then no one knows to isolate, right? If there's not automatic host isolation or things like that. So yeah, a lot of just little like nitpicky things that can be done, that should be done to really get the most out of those products.
It's awesome, James. Other questions before good stuff, by the way, Andy, as always. And is this helpful, guys? Just quick, maybe thumbs up if so.
We're almost scripting a lunch and learn with this process.
Well,
what you're
that was the
trying to get
intent,
for me.
Andy. Literally the intent, for you guys to have something to take away. I'll send this to everybody if you'd like it. All right, so let's talk about prevention, and again, things that I think are as John Strand likes to say, right? Motherhood and apple pie. Like, again, we all think about this, but again, our clients are our prospects, right? Are they setting up unique, strong passwords? And again, how many of them are using the same password for everything? And as James said, is SSO being set up? And James, quick story again for you, because I think they're just so relevant. I always remember the one about somebody hiring a new, they LinkedIn, hire a new person. She's young, you can tell she's a graduate of Alabama Clemson Tide. Just give us a quick narrative of how you got in on this one, because it's, again, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, this was I can't remember what product, but they're using like a self-service password reset. And we're doing our reconnaissance on it, and I'm looking at all their external facing services, and we're like, all right, there's a self-service password reset. Like, let me just throw in someone's email and see what it does. And I threw in, when we're doing this, we always look for like recent college grads, people that have typically a lot of social media, because that's when you can gain the most information. And I threw in this girl's email, and there was like 2 security questions, like what was the name of your dog, and what's your favorite sports team? I'm like, these are like if you're on social media and you find someone's profile, you can probably figure this stuff out by going through it. So I found her on Facebook, was looking through it. Like her second profile picture was her with her dog, and her dog was in an Alabama jersey, and the caption was "Hanging with my pal Spike #Roll Tide." So like literally, like, I couldn't draw it up any better. I was like, in one picture, I had both answers. I was like, "What's your favorite sports team?" I put Alabama. "What's the name of your dog?" I put Spike, and we're able to reset the password just like that. And it didn't prompt, it didn't text, and send a verification email. I was like, "All right, enter your new password." So yeah, that was less than ideal process for any kind of self-service password reset, but makes her an absolute phenomenal story.
Yeah. And again, this is the stuff that I wanted these stories to come out for you all to share with customers as well, and prospects, about just, again, how a hacker thinks. Hey, you're putting people, we just hired so-and-so. Well, how good is that so-and-so's understanding of that company's, security and, their knowledge and what is on social media? And to James's point, we know younger people in an organization are going to be typically highly active in social media, and they just provide a wealth of OSINT, open
And
source
naive.
intelligence. Yeah. Yeah.
And naive.
And naive. Absolutely.
It's
right,
always
so-
fun, like when you got companies that and you can kind of figure it out, like they have the younger demographics, like when you're fishing them, like Chipotle gift cards is like they can't get enough of them. Like it's like shooting fish in a barrel.
Can you just kind of walk through what you do with that, James? Just again, so that they have the folks here at SaaS Alerts Call have again that story, if you will, in their arsenal.
Yeah, so I mean, like we do a lot of phishing engagements. I mean, and the frameworks we use are basically open source. Like GoFish is a really common one. You can download it from GitHub, hook up an SMTP server to it, and then you can just start making your own templates. So, I just use, it's basically a Chipotle gift card template. It says, it's employee appreciation. You got $25 Chipotle gift card. Click here to redeem it. And when they click on it, it says, "Oh, you need to log into your Outlook account to prove your employment." So they they click it, it goes to a splash page for Outlook. They enter their username, enter their password, and then what it does is redirect them to portal.office.com. So 9 times out of 10, they're already logged in. So they go to it, like once they enter their creds, it just redirects them back there, and they're already logged in. Pretty low tech, and they just think, "Oh, I'm logged in, I'm good to go." But they really just enter their creds into our server. And then what we do, and this is exactly what happens in BEC, is we get the creds, and now it's our turn to try to log in. And then is 2-factor enabled? If it is, can we bypass it? Can we do MFA fatigue? Like really, what can we do with these creds? And there's scripts out there. I can't remember the one, but it was super common where you can just load a set of credentials in it, and it'll spray every single cloud service with that, and just report back if there's either MFA enabled, if you can log in, or if you can't. So we saw a ton of attackers just loading creds into that and just spraying it. And that's when you saw like a lot of the TeamViewer breaches, like back in the day, probably like 5-6 years ago, a lot of the PayPal breaches, a lot of the Netflix breaches, because people use the same password for everything. I mean, you guys know that probably. So yeah, it's huge out there.
Good stuff. Andy, did you have a question?
I did. That brings up two points for the business owner to think about. One, what is the advantage for what does it cost? Let me ask this, James, approximately for an incident response. If you get called in on someone that was breached, what is the typical cost just to begin this resurrecting, laying out what's happened and putting this back together in a secure environment? Typically,
and James, before you start answering that, one of the things, Andy, we're going to eventually get to too, is the notion that in 2019, Microsoft enabled logging. So James, maybe talk to us about what that really is. You took us in a great place, Andy, but this is an important part that impacts the cost here.
Yeah. So, I mean, most IR firms, you're paying $500 an hour. And there's a minimum of about 15 hours, 20 hours. So you're 10 grand in the hole, just whether it takes an hour or 20 hours. I mean, it's usually a fixed cost at that point. And yeah, it's, we've been involved in a lot of cases where, they're like, "Okay, can you do BEC? Can you see what's going on?" "Okay, cool. Yeah, we can do it." okay, where are your logs? And like, we disabled unified log management, or we don't use unified log management, or we do it, but we only keep logs for 30 days. I'm like, well, like I can't get blood from a stone, you know what I mean? So now we're looking through other network logs and try to figure it out. So, I mean, even from the IR perspective, like God forbid if something does happen, making sure you have the right logs and they're centrally managed and they're easily accessible, and like you do tabletops and things like that to, you know, mock scenarios of, well, if this does happen, do we have everything we need to provide it to a firm or to do an internal investigation on it, goes a long way in terms of saving money from an IR and time from the IR process.
Let me just take this one step further. Beyond you, do you normally deal with attorneys or other regulatory bodies that might, like, you know, so you get the point is that it's not just your cost. There's going to be attorneys' fees, and there's cost of putting it all back together and getting them operational. And what happens if their data is lost?
Yeah, I mean, the attorney is a great point. You know, and then you got the breach notification, so like that whole process, right? And
Mhm.
you know, one of the most interesting, you brought up, you know, a good thought of mine. Like one of the most interesting things I saw was when we did incident responses a couple of years back, we worked with a company, it was a healthcare organization, and they said, don't talk to us at all, only work through our attorney. And I'm like, and it was kind of bizarre. Like the attorney signed the statement of work. Like we didn't talk to the customer at all. Everything was through the attorney. And the reason they did that, and I don't know whether this holds up in court, but they're like, oh, well, that means this breach is under attorney-client privilege, which means that it can't ever get published, right? It can't ever go because it's all confidential between the attorney. So I'm like, I thought that was an interesting route. I don't know how it would hold up. Luckily, we didn't have to go that far. But yeah, attorneys are, you know, and the crazy part to me is like IR firms are more expensive than attorneys, like for the most part. Like the attorney is the cheap aspect of any kind of incident response engagement.
Yeah.
But if you get sued, then it's even more.
Yeah, if you get sued, then yeah, that's a whole nother bag of worms you want to avoid.
Yeah, really good stuff. I mean, Andy, we could go down that whole rabbit hole being in healthcare like you are, you know, about, you know, having to, you know, notify regulators and all the cost of the you know, any type of PII, PHI
Yeah.
that gets
And
exposed.
and to think about reputational damage. That's
Yeah.
the other piece. But if
Right.
this gets published, right, and it will be published if it's a breach, that's the
Yeah,
other
if it's
piece.
exfilled, well, I mean, that's that's the card the threat actor has, right?
Mhm.
That is the most powerful card they have in there. But so other ways in which we can prevent, obviously we talked about, you know, EDR versus AV, obviously Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi. James, have you guys done any, you know, rabbit type, you know, stuff and taken over in public Wi-Fi as well? I know you've done, I know you guys have done a lot of physical breaching as well, which you've got some phenomenal stories that cracked me up, physically entering, but anything on public Wi-Fi?
Yeah, I mean the main thing on public Wi-Fi is like going, especially like for like, you know, there's like the shared office buildings that have like Time Warner free Wi-Fi or AT&T free Wi-Fi, where for whatever reason employees use it and they do work things on it. And it's like, well, you know, we're seeing a lot of these what I like to call West Coast networks now, where it's like there's nothing on prem. Like the user experience is the same whether you're at an airport, you're at a Starbucks, or you're at your house. So you can access the exact same thing. So I mean, I think when you allow a user to do that and like, well, my user experience doesn't change, so I'm just gonna, you know, they start traveling more, they start going to hotels. It's like that's when public Wi-Fi will become even more dangerous, because what we'll do is we'll just clone like a public hotspot, even like a hotel, and then they connect to it, and then we do like TLS and SSL decrypt and different downgrade attacks. And depending on the sites they go to, like the popular cloud sharing sites all have protections against this kind of stuff, but you'd be kind of surprised at like how many smaller banks and credit unions and things like that don't. And you can downgrade those communications and capture credentials in plain text and do all sorts of other nefarious things on that network. So yeah, we've done it. You know, a lot of times the Wi-Fi is as part of our physical engagement. Like if I want to get credentials, I'll host a captive portal.
You froze a bit. There you are.
Oh, sorry.
You froze for a minute.
Yeah, but the Wi-Fi stuff goes hand in hand with the physical stuff most of the time.
The importance of secure connections.
Yeah, I'm also by the way, Hack the Box, I'm also putting in here for Ben. John Strand has an amazing new getting started in pen testing course, which is in his pay what you can model. Ben, have you taken any of his stuff? Yeah, try Hack Me's great. But if you Google John's, yeah, good. Yeah, just Ben, just hit up anti-siphon, and then and you'll see. And by the way, on the cyber call, we'll have John Strand this Monday talking about leveling up skills in cyber for MSP and MSSPs and how to approach that. Okay. Yeah, obviously these are, again, for us, we get it looking at links. But again, I think it's really, something, if you're doing a lunch and learn, again, hovering over, showing somebody, I mean, I had one the other day, which, was a company that I follow and I'm really interested in. And I got a phishing from them. And I'm like, I was with my girlfriend. I'm like, oh, check this. And I'm like, I caught myself and hovered over, the email, and obviously found out it wasn't. So James, even, us that are in IT and security, right? It's easy to fall for stuff.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, like, even as like a business owner, right? Like you get tax stuff all the time, right? You get, invoices all the time. And, back when, when I was just an engineer doing this stuff, if I saw that, I'd be like, this isn't for me. But I mean, now that you're wearing a lot of different hats now, there's been times I've been sent stuff and I'm like, wait, this isn't from Jim, my account. This is from someone else. Yeah, you can get tripped up on it.
Yeah. Especially how busy we are, right, James? I mean, again, as a business owner, right, you have multiple, many employees, you're up late, you're juggling lots of things, right?
For sure. Yeah. No, I mean, and I can't remember who I was talking to. It was another, or I saw it on LinkedIn. It was a guy I follow who has his own pen test company. And he was like, yeah, it was on Twitter. It was my buddy Paul. And he posted and he was like, yeah, I got phished today. And I clicked the link and I downloaded the document. He's like, and it took me a second after I downloaded it to realize that, let me check to see who this was from. It wasn't from the guy I thought it was. But, especially like for guys like us, and I'm sure for a lot of people on this call, it's like when that happens to you, it's kind of a pride hit. It's like you never, like, yeah, you didn't do it, but you wouldn't ever think it would go that far.
Yeah. What's interesting is in the Verizon data breach report each year, believe it or not, IT is one of the top. Sorry, didn't mean to switch that. Let me go back. IT is one of the top verticals to have compromise. And the rationale is, again, one, being in that fast-paced mode, and number two, wanting to quote unquote, be prompt and please your customer. So can you all relate to that? And does that make sense of how you could see even in our field falling for something?
That's why I hate two-factor authentication. Until SAML came along, it was really just laborious.
Right. All right. Very cool. Here's some other, prevention techniques. As far as, tagging, enabling multi-factor. Have you guys pretty much made SSO mandatory in your organizations? And are you getting any pushback? Just curious. Anybody want to talk about that real quick?
I will say that it's imperative and it increases productivity.
Yeah.
I mean, the imperative from a security standpoint, but I want my team to be as effective. And you talked about fatigue from cell phones tapping. If you're having to deal with TFA all the time, and having single sign-on makes this so much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. James, maybe just, as far as prevention, you want to just talk about the last few here. And I know we talked about it briefly, enable logging, but again, and you mentioned people doing 30 days, but I'd love, to get just some quick conversation. Are you, one, if you could talk about the importance of it, James, how you do it, what things you should turn on potentially, because again, Microsoft's default logging that's turned on isn't necessarily going to get you the things you would need in an incident response. And so your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, the main thing with logging and like, we do a lot of like tabletop purple team type stuff. And like, we'll have companies with full blown SOCs, like security operations centers internally, and I'll run an attack and like, there'll be 4 or 5 people on the call. All they do all day is look at logs, and they're like, I don't see this. I don't see this. I don't see this. And like, well, how come we don't see it? Oh, it's only going to this person. It's like, well, what's the problem? The problem is the logs aren't centrally managed, right? They going like the alerts are going to people's mail inboxes. They're getting hit by spam. Sometimes they're on vacation. They're not getting those alerts. So it's like, the big thing for that I see is like Windows AD event log logs basically everything. And all you really need to do is pull the relevant things from that. So like when we do attacks like Kerber roasting and password spraying, like those create specific events in there. And people are like, well, we just, we don't have log aggregation. Well, it aggregates somewhere. Like it aggregates in the DC. Like you just need to pull that stuff from the DC and then create alerts based on that traffic. So centrally managed logs are huge. And, we've seen it where they have them, but they're not centrally managed. I mean, we've seen where they're centrally managed, but it's not alerting on the right things. Bunch of different stuff, but just, O365 in general. Yeah. I think the default's either 45 days. I always recommend saying having 180 days of logs on there, because sometimes we've seen attackers sit in those inboxes for years before they find out. One of the cases was wild. It was a Maze ransomware group. And what we found was that they actually compromised a user's inbox and didn't log in for a year. And their password policy obviously was pretty bad because they had never changed their password, but they didn't log in for a year. I'm like, why didn't they log in for a year? And the only thing I could think of is that they were so busy hacking other people that they didn't get around to this company for a year. But luckily they kept good logs. So we were able to figure out like when they got in. We saw the IP from Romania that did it. But yeah, I mean, you want to make sure that you have really good logs. And like I said before, if you ever have to engage an IR firm, you'll be very, very thankful that you have those logs.
Yeah, very true. Just real quick, Andy, Jason Simpson, you made a comment, and then Ben, you've dealt with it. Jason, are you okay to come on and talk to us? Because again, this is the kind of stuff that these stories are so important, I think, again, for sales, right? Because being able to talk about real world examples is really important. Would you be okay talking?
Yeah, I can do that.
Awesome.
Can you guys hear me okay? I'm in the car,
Perfect.
unfortunately.
No, you're perfect.
Yeah, you sound good.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so the client in question was a legal assistant at a law firm. And fortunately, the bad guys didn't spend a lot of time looking into her account when they compromised it. This was a law firm I've been trying to get on these various security services, but they've been resistant. So that made for an interesting meeting the next day, I'll tell you that. But anyways, I was dealing with, one of my employees was dealing with this person earlier in the day, and I was aware of it. And all of a sudden I get an email from her, and it's got a document in a OneDrive SharePoint, a legitimate SharePoint link from her OneDrive. And it's, look at the link, check everything. I'm like, no, this is legit, but I'm not expecting anything from her. Maybe Patrick, okay, I'm going to call. So I gave her a call, and no, she did not send me that. So obviously it was immediately identified as compromise. Immediately went in, locked out the account, changed password, forced sign out, all of that kind of thing. And then went in and started investigating. And what they had done is they realized that this client had M365 standard, had OneNote, obviously, but the client was not using OneNote in any way, shape, or form. So identifying that, they went and created a document which contained a malicious link to an actual phishing site. From that, shared the entire OneNote notebook as a public link, and then sent out 500 emails to everyone in the legal community within the city. And that was the deal. So fortunately, I found that very quickly and was able to disable the link before too many people started screaming. But that's what happened. And everything I have done to train my clients to identify what is a malicious attack would have completely gone all over their heads. They would have looked at this and went, this is 100% legit.
Yeah. And what a for lack of a better word, James, spear phishing in essence, right? Because it's they're in the account and it's legit.
Yeah. And I mean, that's actually using a pretty good technique. It's almost like domain fronting. So they'll hide links using legitimate links. So like we see this a lot with Cloudflare, and some like CDNs, the content delivery networks, where they'll actually hide links by using a OneDrive link or a document or a Google Docs that has the actual malicious link in it. And that typically will be will help it get by spam filters.
Awesome. Really good. Really, really good stuff. Andy, what'd you have?
One more question. How does blocking IPs or connections from outside the United States or North America reduce this potential? Someone might think that they're totally safe, right? In reality,
Yeah.
that's just one minor prevention step.
That's majority. That's the reason behind that is mostly through like C2 command and control frameworks. So like if it's a C2 hosted in Russia, you don't see, I mean, it happens, but you don't see a ton of command and control frameworks hosted in the United States, unless you're like a pen test company like us and we host ours in AWS. But that's the thought process there, is if someone can't connect into it, and if you're only allowing US based traffic, it won't connect to outside countries. Not to say, and we see this all the time, where a company will get breached and then an attacker will use that US based system and IP to then breach other organizations. So now it's like, well, you blocked outside IPs, but it's basically just a chain of businesses that are breached, they're hopping from one to the other, switching. It's basically like a legitimate proxy network where they're just hacking other companies and then using those IPs and burning those, and they just keep going.
So that's why a company like SaaS Alerts is essential, because you can see in real time what's happening. You can disable the process, and you can have an instant response instead of waiting till the next morning for the CFO who's getting 1,000 requests, right? You can actually shut these things down and save a ton of money that way.
That's awesome. Just in closing, the last few things I put in here is one through like a MITRE attack, and so you guys can see, kind of what's going on, and then through Lockheed Martin's kill chain. They have a cloud security kill chain. So I kitted all this up. Would this be helpful to send out to you guys and for creating lunch and learns and things like that?
Yeah, I would like it, because it's actually something we can do on a Zoom with a client or a prospect and talk about why SaaS Alerts is different and better than what they have right now.
Awesome. I'll get it out. What I'll do is I'll get it to Michelle and I'll have her distribute it to everybody, because I think she has everybody's information. In fact, wait a minute, I might be, I don't know, based on my rights, let me stop sharing for a minute. And James, while I'm doing this, let me see if I can just put it in the chat, and you can maybe just share. I want to thank you for coming on and sharing your expertise, and maybe just if you want to share a little bit how you work, with MSPs, and because you have your channel based, which is, there's not a lot of companies that in the pen testing world that do that.
Yeah, no. So like, kind of the thing that, our Hackett's differentiator is the friendliness to the channel. And, when I first started pen testing a decade ago, the one thing that really bothered me was like when we'd get into clients, we'd do a pen test and we work with the MSP, and it almost became a competition. Like there was hostility where it was like, well, I don't want you making us look bad, and I don't want, in that level of dynamic. And it's like, well, what we do at Hack is like, we work together. Like the goal is to make the customer more secure. The goal is to leave them more secure than when they came here. And a lot of times we can't do that alone. We'll have recommendations or remediation advice that we need the MSP to go and implement, or we need product that they need to supply, or a managed service that they need to do. So that's really the beauty of us is, we don't just give you a report or give the customer a report and say, here you go, have fun. It's like, all right, you guys need to implement this, implement it. Let's make sure it works the way we want it to work. Retest. Okay, cool. Now I'll move on to the next thing. So it's a very collaborative process that benefits really all the parties involved.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that, James. And I did put, up in chat for any of those, whether you want to connect with James on LinkedIn, James, if you want to put your email in real quick again. And I was able to put the PowerPoint. Can you guys access that, by the way? Just quick check before we let everybody go. Can you guys access that?
Downloaded it already. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. It's downloading now. All right. I'll keep this up open for any questions as we have a few minutes in closing, make sure everybody can get it. Any things you'd like us to work on for enablement between, that could be helpful?
I would suggest how we could talk about how SaaS alerts fits into a hierarchy of security service offerings for an MSP that will provide a secure and provide the customer an economy that says, look, there's an impact to a breach or a violation. And this is how we, that kind of discussion that talks about at a business owner level, not just here's the vulnerabilities. This is what the costs are, right? This is what it means. Because
Sure.
I encounter doctors all the time who say, we need to reduce our budget. We have to operate IT within a budget, and your services, the security services you're recommending, are outside of that budget. And I'm kind of going, geez, all it takes is a breach, and you've lost reputation galore and potentially Medicare issues, depending how you
Good.
represented yourself.
Fair enough. And again, I'm sorry, I don't know if it's Robert, Richard, or something else, but I'm writing to you right now that all these are in a YouTube channel that SaaS Alerts created. And I'm not hey, Richard, I'm not 100% sure. I know it's on their website under resources. And if you email Michelle, let me just get her email in here real quick for you to make sure that you can see where all the recordings are.
There is a SaaS Alerts channel on YouTube,
Yes.
and that's where they all are.
Yes, correct. Okay. Awesome. James, again, thanks a million for coming on. SaaS Alerts Group. Oh, thanks for sharing that, Justin. That's awesome. Wishing you all a fantastic day and look forward to seeing you next Thursday back at our normal time when the SaaS Alerts team is back in house. Until then, everybody have a fantastic week. Take care, everyone.
Sure.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
James.